What is samsara? The nature of rebirth in Buddhism. Samsara literally means wandering on. Many people think of it as the Buddhist name for the place where we currently live, the place we leave when we go to Nibbana. But in the early Buddhist texts, it's the answer, not to the question, where are we? But to the question, what are we doing? Instead of a place, it's a process, the tendency to keep creating worlds and then moving into them. As one world falls apart, you create another one and go there. At the same time, you bump into other people who are creating their own worlds too. The play and creativity in the process can sometimes be enjoyable. In fact, it would be perfectly innocuous if it didn't entail so much suffering. The worlds we create keep caving in and killing us. Moving into a new world requires effort, not only the pains and risks of taking birth, but also the hard knocks, mental and physical, that come from going through childhood into adulthood over and over again. The Buddha once asked his monks, "Which do you think is greater, the water in the oceans or the tears you've shed while wandering on?" His answer, "The tears." Think of that the next time you gaze at the ocean or play in its waves. In addition to creating suffering for ourselves, the worlds we create feed off the worlds of others, just as theirs feed off ours. In some cases, the feeding may be mutually enjoyable and beneficial, but even then, the arrangement has to come to an end. More typically, it causes harm to at least one side of the relationship, often to both. When you think of all the suffering that goes into keeping just one person clothed, fed, sheltered, and healthy, the suffering both for those who have to pay for these requisites, as well as those who have to labor or die in their production, you see how exploitative even the most rudimentary process of world building can be. This is why the Buddha tried to find the way to stop samsara-ing. Once he had found it, he encouraged others to follow it too. Because samsara-ing is something that each of us does, each of us has to stop it him or herself alone. If samsara were a place, it might seem selfish for one person to look for an escape, leaving others behind. But when you realize that it's a process, there's nothing selfish about stopping it at all. It's like giving up an addiction or an abusive habit. When you learn the skills needed to stop creating your own worlds of suffering, you can share those skills with others so that they can stop creating theirs. At the same time, you'll never have to feed off the worlds of others, so to that extent you're lightening their load as well. It's true that the Buddha likened the practice for stopping samsara to the act of going from one place to another, from this side of a river to the further shore. But the passages where he makes this comparison often end with a paradox. The further shore has no here, no there, no in-between. From that perspective, it's obvious that samsara's parameters of space and time were not the pre-existing context in which we wandered. They were the result of our wandering. For someone addicted to world building, the lack of familiar parameters sounds unsettling. But if you're tired of creating incessant, unnecessary suffering, you might want to give it a try. After all, you could always resume building if the lack of here or there turned out to be dull. But of those who have learned how to break the habit, no one has ever felt tempted to samsara again. Samsara divided by zero. The goal of Buddhist practice, Nibbana, is said to be totally uncaused, and right there is a paradox. If the goal is uncaused, how can a path of practice, which is causal by nature, bring it about? This is an ancient question. The Milinda Panya, a set of dialogues composed near the start of the Common Era, reports an exchange where King Milinda challenges a monk, Nagasena, with precisely this question. Nagasena replies with an analogy. The path of practice doesn't cause nibbana, he says. It simply takes you there. Just as a road to a mountain doesn't cause the mountain to come into being, but simply leads you to where it is. Nagassena's reply, though apt, didn't really settle the issue within the Buddhist tradition. Over the years, many schools of meditation have taught that mental fabrications simply get in the way of a goal that's uncaused and unfabricated. Only by doing nothing at all and thus not fabricating anything in the mind, they say, will the unfabricated shine forth. This view is based on a very simplistic understanding of fabricated reality, seeing causality as linear and totally predictable. X causes Y, which causes Z, and so on, with no effects turning around to condition their causes, and no possible way of using causality to escape from the causal network. However, one of the many things the Buddha discovered in the course of his awakening was that causality is not linear. The experience of the present is shaped both by actions in the present and by actions in the past. Actions in the present shape both the present and the future. The results of past and present actions continually interact. Thus, there is always room for new input into the system, which gives scope for free will. There is also room for the many feedback loops that make experience so thoroughly complex and that are so intriguingly described in chaos theory. Reality doesn't resemble a simple line or circle. It's more like the bizarre trajectories of a strange attractor or a Mandelbrot set. Because there are many similarities between chaos theory and Buddhist explanations of causality, it seems legitimate to explore those similarities to see what light chaos theory can throw on the issue of how a causal path of practice can lead to an uncaused goal. This is not to equate Buddhism with chaos theory or to engage in pseudoscience. It's simply a search for similes to clear up an apparent conflict in the Buddha's teaching. And it so happens that one of the discoveries of nonlinear math, the basis for chaos theory, throws light on just this issue. In the 19th century, the French mathematician Jules-Henri Poincaré discovered that in any complex physical system there are points he called resonances. If the forces governing the system are described as mathematical equations, the resonances are the points where the equations intersect in such a way that one of the members is divided by zero. This, of course, produces an undefined result, which means that if an object within the system strayed into a resonance point, it would no longer be defined by the causal network determining the system. It would be set free. In actual practice, it's very rare for an object to hit a resonance point. The equations describing the points immediately around a resonance tend to deflect any incoming object from entering the resonance unless the object is on a precise path to the resonance's very heart. Still, it doesn't take too much complexity to create resonances. Poincaré discovered them while calculating the gravitational interactions among three bodies: the Earth, the Sun, and the Moon. The more complex the system, the greater the number of resonances, and the greater the likelihood that objects will stray into them. It's no wonder that meteors on a large scale and electrons on a small scale occasionally wander right into a resonance in a gravitational or electronic field, and thus to the freedom of total unpredictability. This is why meteors sometimes leave the solar system, and why your computer occasionally freezes for no apparent reason. It's also why strange things could happen someday to the beating of your heart. If we were to apply this analogy to the Buddhist path, the system we're in is Samsara, the round of rebirth. Its resonances would be what the text called non-fashioning, the opening to the uncaused Nibbana. The wall of resistant forces around the resonances would correspond to pain, stress, and attachment. To allow yourself to be repelled by stress or deflected by attachment, no matter how subtle, would be like approaching a resonance but then veering off to another part of the system. But to focus directly on analyzing stress and attachment and deconstructing their causes would be like getting on an undeflected trajectory right into the resonance and finding total, undefined freedom. This, of course, is simply an analogy, but it's a fruitful one for showing that there is nothing illogical in actively mastering the processes of mental fabrication and causality for the sake of going beyond fabrication, beyond cause and effect. At the same time, it gives a hint as to why a path of total inaction would not lead to the unfabricated. If you simply sit still within the system of causality, you'll never get near the resonances where true non-fashioning lies. You'll keep floating around in Samsara, but if you take aim at stress and clinging and work to take them apart, you'll be able to break through to the point where the present moment gets divided by zero in the mind.